Hello people, today we're going through the HL content for 1.3 Government Intervention. We'll be calculating and illustrating the effects of the four government interventions of taxes, subsidies, price ceilings and price floors. We'll be building on what we did with linear equations in section 1.1. First, we'll look at taxes. Here we see the demand and supply equations for depends, which are essentially nappies for adults. The first thing to do is find the equilibrium price and quantity. Pause now and do this. This is revision. Okay, here we go. Quantity supplied equals 40 and P equals 4. Now, suppose the government decides to put a specific tax of $3 on depends. We know that a specific indirect tax decreases supply. Suppliers have to give $3 per packet to the government. Therefore, they'll require $3 more per packet to make the same revenue as before. To find our new supply equation, simply substitute P minus 3 for P into the supply equation. Do the simple rearranging here and we'll see a new supply equation of QS1 equals negative 100 plus 20P. You now have three curves to plot. I suggest you pause and give yourselves a go at it. This will be good revision. So you would come up with points much like these. Now we just plot like so. Being careful to label the curves correctly, of course. You can see here that if you're just asked to draw the new supply curve, you could easily just draw a parallel line $3 higher at each point. Now we'll calculate the new equilibrium. Nothing too new here. We just make the demand equation equal to the new supply equation. So there we go. Then we do the simple maths and we find out that price equals 6. That's our new equilibrium price. Now to get the quantity, we substitute P equals 6 into either the demand or supply equation, the new supply equation, and we'll find that quantity now equals 20. What you should do is give yourself a visual check of the diagram you've drawn and you will double check that this is correct. Now there are a bunch of other calculations that you may need to do. Nothing tough, but you do have to understand these concepts. As we go through, ensure that you know why it is the area indicated for each calculation. The maths of course is basic. If you've drawn accurate curves, you can easily calculate the figures. So tax incidence on consumers, like that. Tax incidence on producers is there. Post-tax consumer expenditure is there. Post-tax producer revenue is here. Now, important to remember that what goes to the government does not go to the producer. That's where people tend to go wrong. Government revenue. And knowing that this area is the total tax paid is crucial to the knowing of how to do the previous calculations. It comes from this, so get it right. A common mistake is to think that it's the area between $4 and $7 and out to a quantity of 40. You have to realise that the price paid is not just the previous price plus 3 and the equilibrium quantity will go down. In the heat of the exam, people do get this wrong, so make sure of it. You need to know initial consumer surplus, just remembering that it's above the equilibrium price. It's the difference between what they were willing to pay, the demand curve, and what they actually paid, the equilibrium price. Then the new consumer surplus, same principle, and there's a few more as well. We've got the initial producer surplus, the new producer surplus, which will be much smaller, the initial social surplus, so all surplus of the consumers, producers and government before the tax, the new social surplus, the surplus of all the stakeholders after the tax, and the welfare loss. This is welfare that was previously held by society, but due to the tax is not held by anyone, even the government. Now, on to subsidies. The concepts are largely the same, so we won't belabor it as much. Same product, same equations, so same equilibrium price and quantity. Now, we suppose there's a subsidy of $3 per packet. I guess the government wants all those people who are incontinent to have access to this item. This time, for a subsidy, we substitute P plus 3 into our supply equation. From this, we get our new linear supply equation by doing simple rearranging there. 20 plus 20p. So pause here and plot out those three curves again. And the points you have calculated look a lot like these ones on the right hand side. So we'll just plot them on the graph and insert the lines like that. Easy. Of course, if you draw the lines correctly, you can read off the new equilibrium price and quantity, but we will just go through and calculate it as well. So, just like before, you make the demand equation equal to the new supply equation and solve for P. Simple maths, P equals $2. So then all we do is sub this into either equation to find the new quantity, new equilibrium quantity. You can do either the demand equation or the new supply equation. So plug that in and we find that at the new equilibrium price of $2, the quantity is 60. We won't go into the same detail, but be aware of the other calculations you'll need to make. Consumer, producer and social surpluses before and after the subsidy, welfare loss after the subsidy, and post-subsidy consumer expenditure and producer revenue. Make sure you actually know and practice these. Don't just nod your head and go, yeah, that's straightforward, because in the exam, you'll need to have practiced these in the past to get it right. Onto price ceilings. Remember that this is a level above which price cannot go. Given these linear equations in the market for bread, we can easily solve for the equilibrium of price equals 4, quantity equals 40. Then, we're given a price ceiling of $2. Remember, it always has to be below equilibrium to have any effect. So people get confused, a ceiling is low and a floor is high. So we'll sub $2 into each of those supply and demand equations, and we'll see that the quantity demanded at this price ceiling is 60 and the quantity supplied is 20. So there are 40 more loaves of bread demanded than supplied. There is a shortage of 40 loaves. Get into the habit of using the units. Don't just write there is a shortage of 40, write 40 loaves. Don't give any opportunity for marks to be taken off. Now, you may be asked to calculate the change in consumer expenditure due to the ceiling. This is really as simple as it sounds. What did they spend before the ceiling, and what did they spend after? So, some really basic maths. We see that at first they spent $4 on 40 loaves of bread, $160, then $2 on only 20 loaves of bread, so that equals $40. Where are we? So consumer expenditure has decreased by $120. You might be wondering, why has consumer expenditure gone down? Why are they buying fewer loaves of bread now that there's a lower price? Well, it's because suppliers just aren't willing to supply that much at that price, so they're only willing to supply 20 at that price. Next we illustrate it. So you know how to do the curves by now, so I'm not going to go through that. Just add in the horizontal price ceiling line at $2 and simple. Now we will have to illustrate some other effects, so we'll get onto that now. Nothing too difficult. You want the shortage, which there will always be with a price ceiling. You want the initial consumer expenditure, the new consumer expenditure, and the change in consumer expenditure, which you can just read off easily between you can read it off the graph and you can do the simple calculations. That's it for price ceilings. We'll move on to price floors now. So here we're looking at the equations for a kilogram of Pink Lady apples. You need to first solve for equilibrium. Done that plenty of times, so that's done. Then we'll sub in the price floor. So price floor, that should read, price floor of $6. So we'll add that in. We'll sub that in to P equals 6 into each equation. There you go. So we find that there are 40 kilos more Pink Lady apples supplied than demanded. So therefore, there is a surplus of 40 kilos of Pink Lady apples. We will have to, again, calculate change in consumer spending on apples. So that is really basic. Just sub in the numbers. Consumer expenditure, we'll find, has decreased by $40. Now, important thing to remember is that when there's a surplus due to a price floor, the government needs to step in and buy this surplus. So the government expenditure, therefore, is just the price floor times the surplus. So the price floor is $6, the surplus is 40, therefore the government has to buy 40 kilos of apples at $6 each, which means it's $240 that the government spends. We'll have to see the change in producer revenue. So we find the original revenue, then the new revenue with the price floor. An important thing to remember here, this is crucial, this is what people get wrong, is that the government buys the surplus. Don't fall into the trap of just including what consumers will buy. So we do the maths and we see that new producer revenue is $360, so it's grown by $200. Remember to keep those units in when you give your answers. Illustrating the price floor, we just place in the horizontal line at $6, and from here we can read off the information we need to make our calculations. So we'll look at those. We need to be able to read off the surplus, initial consumer expenditure, equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, new consumer expenditure, the change in consumer expenditure, you can see, just do the simple maths. The government expenditure, see that's quite a large portion here, the initial producer revenue, the new producer revenue, and of course the change in producer revenue. Alright, that's it for 1.3 high level. It may all seem straightforward, but people do get these wrong. Don't be one of those people, please. We'll do some exercises in class.